in man, because there's no such thing, there's no such universal, but they do come together in that they are men, or being a man, which he calls the status of man. But Gilbert seems to be using the word in a quite different way, in the sense that the features which are essential to something, so sort of being a human being, are not part of the status. The status is rather used to talk about non-essential features, but still they're features related to the nature of something. And you'll see this in the handout number 24, where he applies the notion of status to man in relation to sin. These are the different status of human nature before man sinned and after he sinned, and that which would have been given to him as a reward if he hadn't sinned. And these cash out to the idea that before man sinned, so before Adam's sin, human beings were able to sin or not sin. After the fall, human beings without special help are not able not to sin, but had Adam, are not able not to sin, but had Adam persevered, then they would have become not able to sin. So here he's talking about status, and that's how he wants to, that's the general notion he wants to use to describe relations as a sort of power. I'm talking about powers of human being in relation to their nature. That's quite suggestive, but he doesn't elaborate what he means by those suggestions. So let me come quickly to my conclusion, because I want to leave us a few minutes for discussion, and of course we have a rather late start. So I think that this survey makes it clear that what most writers on relations in medieval philosophy present as the standard theory, standard account, i.e. that relations are real monadic properties, is typical of only one strand of the early medieval discussion, that carried out in logical commentaries of the 12th century, and perhaps not even for all of them. Otherwise, the texts we've examined from the early Middle Ages differ from the standard account in two ways which are themselves sharply differentiated, though perhaps less antithetical than they may seem at first sight. So either, occasionally, early medieval thinkers treated relations as real, but didn't present them as monadic. The striking example here is Eriugena, but there's at least a trace of this attitude in one of his most important sources, that's to say, the Pseudo-Augustinian Categoria Dece. Because the way it describes relation as both inside and outside ousia, because a relation links one ousia with something outside it, that's to say, another ousia. More usually, though, the difference from the standard theory rests on denying the reality of relations, or at least lessening their ontological good standing. One way of doing so is to declare that relations are just a matter of language. Now, this position is not to put forward the view, which would be absurd, that whether you are taller than 5-foot Jack depends on facts about language and utterances, and not about the world. Because, of course, as everyone admits, it depends on the fact that you are 6 foot tall. But on the view that relations are purely linguistic, once we have Jack's height and your height, all the facts are there. And it's a matter of language alone that we can truly say not merely that you are 6 foot tall, but that you're taller than Jack. So that is a perfectly reasonable view. And it does seem to be the one which the early medieval glossator of Boethius' De Trinitate took. Possibly it's what Boethius himself took, But I think that's unlikely because although the view may be philosophically defensible, it would have rested his Trinitarian theology in tatters. But, so rather than take this purely linguistic view, what quite a few early medieval thinkers preferred to do was to deny relation to the same ontological standing as accents of quantity and quality, and certainly not the same ontological standing as substance, but to leave rather vague what exactly relations are. So I think that's what happens in that passage in Boethius' De Trinitate on the most plausible interpretation. That seems also to be Anselm's view, perhaps rather than the more radical anti-realism which Ockham attributes to him. It seems also to be the view of the later Abelard and of Gilbert of Poitiers. Gilbert arguably tries to give an explanation of what relations amount to in terms of the thing's nature and its powers, but I wonder whether this isn't just a matter of postponing the problem rather than solving it. Because he gives us so little clarity on what he means by nature and power. Moreover, there are some relations for which an explanation in terms of nature and powers seems quite contrary. It's forcing the notion of my nature to say that it includes the power for me to be on your left. But even suppose we accept this way of speaking, what's important about the relation is whether or not it actually holds at some time, and not just whether it would be consistent with my nature if it were to hold. However, I know Gilbert of Poitiers well enough to realize that often when an idea of his seems weak, it's not because it really is weak, it's because I haven't understood it properly. So what my conclusion should be most of all is to underline that the field of relations in early medieval philosophy, before 1200, is one that hasn't been properly investigated and needs to be. And I'd just end with a very straightforward methodological point which follows from all this. Just as our understanding of medieval philosophy is desperately incomplete and lopsided when we ignore the parallel and intertwining non-Latin traditions, the Greek tradition, the Arabic tradition, the Jewish tradition, so it is also partial and distorted when the early Middle Ages in the Latin tradition, and that's a period which we should see as stretching seamlessly from late antiquity until about 1200, when this period is simply left to be treated in the occasional aside and through unfounded generalizations. Thank you very much.
Now, we'll open the turn for questions. Abrimos un turno de preguntas. Sí, sí, sí.
Thank you very much for the conference. Et je ne sais pas avant de poser ma question si je peux parler en français. Oui. Et vous pourrez répondre en anglais. Et je comprends, mais vous parlez peut-être. Bien, c'est très intéressant pour moi votre conférence. J'ai une petite demande et une question. Et si qu'il est possible, selon votre pensée, selon votre opinion, que nous avons deux niveaux de relations au Moyen Âge. Et que cette possibilité, c'est à partir de la lecture des catégories d'Étienne. Et on parle, vous citez ici, à savoir la conception de la relation extra substantia et in substantia, intra substantia, que, par exemple, Eliogena commande et cite aussi à 4-7 ans du périfice. Il y a une certaine ductibilité de la relation extra et intra. Et alia, nous lisons dans votre texte, alia categoria sub communia, it est intra et extra ossia. Et c'est pour ça que nous pouvons parler, et c'est la différence pour moi entre Augustin, Boetius et nous pouvons parler de la relation non prédicamentale, c'est le titre de votre conférence, non prédicamentale en Dieu, et la relation prédicamentale in créature. Et ce que les catégories donnent cette possibilité au-delà des catégories aristotéliciennes. Je ne sais si vous comprenez la demande. Il y a deux niveaux de la catégorie des relations, intra et extra substantielles.
So, I mean, I think that I don't think that the paraphraser, the author of the Categoria Decem, is talking about there being two levels. With the three categories that are singled out as being inside and outside ousia, the idea is of some sort of reciprocity, or that you need, you have to have one ousia, but also something outside it, something else, so that, for example, in the idea of doing, this is illustrated by the fact that you not only have to have somebody who's striking, but something which is struck, or somebody who is struck. You've got to read something. It's not, you can't just have a reader. You need an object for the reading. And in a relation, you have one thing which has to be related to something else. I think that's how you get to the inside and outside. It's true, though, and it's interesting that in Eriugena, and so this is a bit which I don't give you the passage here, and I didn't talk about. It's another one of his ideas. He glosses this idea in a quite different sort of way, because he says, well, you can have relation inside ousia, which is the relation between the species and genera. Yeah. And so obviously that's inside ousia because it's in relation to it, and you have then, if you like, more ordinary relations, so my relation to my son or something like that, which is outside ousia. And there I think you might want to talk about two levels.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Professor, for your lecture. I see that along the text in the handout, we can identify the behavior of relation because the relation ever is connected with another category. When you talk about the quantity, quality, about relation, you have a relation, but behind the relation you have another category. Especially in the last text of Gilbert, the Rei Circunstantias, he tries to avoid the behavior of relation, that you have a relation, the behavior of relation is you have a mask and behind you have another category that explain that relation by itself isn't real or reality in this kind of vision of accidental predication. My question is, do you think that the relation that this philosopher, especially in this period, avoid the connection between all the list of categories with the relation, because relation possibly is the genus generalissimum, other genus generalissimum that can explain the other categories, because you have ever a relation, you have a quantity about the comparison between one or another, you have fatherhood, you have the situs, you have the movement, you have action and passion, and every these categories has the same behavior, relational behavior. I don't know if this realisms, temperate realisms try to avoid the relational behavior of the other categories.
But again, actually, you can find that way of thinking in some other passages of Eriugena, because Eriugena is fond of saying that you can find one category in another. So Eriugena says you find relations in all the other categories. It's not the only category that you find in other categories, though. And that seems to be exactly what you're saying. But I think more generally, people would make a big distinction between the relationship between relation and substance, quantity and quality on the one hand, and the other 6 categories on the other hand. And they would see relations being founded not on substance, but on accidents of quantity or quality. That would be how relation stands to those 3. Whereas with regard to the other 6, I think it would be fair to say that all, the 6 plus relation are all relational accidents of some sort, but people don't usually treat relation as the genus of the other 6. It's rather that the other 6 give particular sorts of relational accidents, and then what come as just relations are what are left. So those types of relations which are not, for example, the relationship between a doer and what's done, or what is, or something which is suffering and what causes it to do that, or spatial relations or temporal relations, and so on. So I think that's more how it fits together normally.
Thank you. ¿Hay alguna otra pregunta?
Thank you for your presentation, Professor. My question is, if you can find in this accounts on relation related to the texts that are more influenced by the Trinitarian discussions, if you can find some relation between what this brings of new material to the Aristotelian view, and the idea that is gets stronger and stronger in the 14th century, that there is a mental or conceptual level between the category as a mode of saying things and the real level of it. The mediation of a conceptual level between the two.
Well, yes, I mean, I think it's not so much the idea of Boethius de Trinitate bringing something to the Aristotelian tradition of discussion. It's more that the main tradition of discussion in the early Middle Ages was founded around discussing Boethius' text. Now, I mean, it's true, and I haven't discussed this, that you do have an early medieval gloss tradition on the Categoriae Decem. But I haven't tried to recently, it's something I did ages ago, I looked at lots and lots of manuscripts with glosses of that. I haven't gone back to them all looking at relation. From what I have seen, I don't think you find a lot which is highly interesting there. I think that people were content more to just follow the text in a literal way of the Categoriae Decem. So it seems that they're doing their real thinking about relations in connection with Boethius' text. Until you get to the late 11th and 12th century, when people start elaborating discussions with regard to Boethius. With regard to this what people think of as a later medieval development, where people are more willing to deny the reality of relations altogether, as Occam did, and to some extent people, I think, say Peter Aureli may have done. I mean, my point would be that that's not a new thing at all. As Occam himself realised in looking back at Anselm, though I think Occam might perhaps have exaggerated how far Anselm went. So what we call the standard account, the idea of relations as real, monadic accidents, is actually not really very standard if you're taking the Middle Ages as a whole. It's something which typifies later 13th century, early 14th century writers, but not in general the Middle Ages.
¿Alguna otra pregunta? One question. Thank you very much. 10 minutos de pausa.